Hey patrons, let's take a look at my piece Grim. So early on in the illustration, I do a lot of flatting, so that's what you're seeing here. I'm going through and selecting different areas that are going to have different value patterns in the piece. Yeah, so I wanted Grim to be dark against kind of that, like silhouetted against that window behind him, the stained glass window, and the center being really the focal point where you see his hood and him sort of shushing you with his hand. So yeah, some of the color that you're seeing coming in at this point is me experimenting with tool gradient map. I find that it's good for initial color explorations and just trying to get the sort of tones started in a piece. And I use it just for a little bit of groundwork, sort of like thinking the light is going to be warm, the shadows and grim are going to be cool. And here I've started the first of several attempts at painting the stained glass window. With the stained glass window, I really wanted to tell a story, kind of. So each section of the, sort of each triangle section of the window has a little bit different of like maybe what somebody would live their life for. So one of them is kind of nature, another one's sort of merchantry, one's, I don't know if that's a word, merchantry. One of them is war, another one is knowledge, and then another one is sort of the circle of life. So it's kind of these different, all these different paths that one might, you know, sort of walk in life, combinations of some, or some might be other people, different priorities for people, that kind of thing. Yeah, and early in this piece, I had sort of stained glass window all the way down. You'll see later that I end up kind of changing the direction that I was going with that. It just ended up being a little too busy. It needed more area for the eye to rest in the piece, and when I had stained glass windows, the whole background, it didn't really give you that opportunity. So here I'm working on the center, and I experimented a little bit with not just having it be a solid like light source behind them. I experimented with it just being kind of some geometric shapes, and ultimately I decided that was also a little too busy, and I wanted the focal point to be really crisp with just the solid golden color behind him. You'll notice I pull up a few different reference photos too of different stained glass windows that I was looking at that inspired me. Here I'm starting to bring some of those geometric patterns into the different triangular storylines of the stained glass window, which I really like the way this ends up looking. One of my favorite artists, Therese Nielsen, uses a lot of these sort of geometric patterns in some of her pieces, so it was a little bit of an homage to her. And now I've started experimenting with just a like a monochrome stained glass window, and at this point I've decided to go with sort of color variations in each triangle to sort of spotlight those different storylines of the window. I do a little bit more experimenting later with the monochrome again. Here I'm working with like duotone, so each section has 2 colors. Ultimately I choose monochrome for each window. I felt like that was a little less distracting than having it be duotone like that. It was just a little too much color. Yeah, I even actually go through and colorize basically the whole stained glass window down below before I realized that it's really not going to achieve what I want it to, and then later on ultimately end up sort of painting over it and bringing in some gargoyle heads that I actually really like a whole lot. So I'm glad I made that change. I don't normally paint a lot of geometric stuff. A lot of my stuff is natural woods and stone and land, sort of nature. So this was kind of an interesting challenge for me, and I think that's part of why this piece took me considerably longer than a lot of my stuff, is that figuring out these geometric patterns and shapes and how they interact with each other, and then ultimately just erasing most of them. So I did spend a little bit of time experimenting with bringing some of those colors into the rest of the stained glass to try to harmonize everything. But yeah, it just ultimately just didn't pan out for the stained glass to be the entire background. Now I'm working back up in the main section, bringing a little bit more of those geometric shapes into the piece, and then some of the highlights into the windows as well. Now I'm starting to work out the value on Grim, working on the hood. One thing I wanted to achieve with this piece was a little bit more of a painterly look. I talked with Justin Gerard at the One Fantastic Workshop, and him and David Peterson were both taking a look at some of my line work decisions, and one thing Justin said was it's hard to walk a line that's in between rendered and like stylistic drawing line work, and it's something that I try to do in my pieces, but it's really hard to achieve that, like really achieve a unified painting. And so with this piece I was like, okay, well, if one thing that he really pointed out was if you have a highlighted edge and then you have a line on the outside of that highlighted edge, basically where the highlight bumps right into the line, visually it flattens the image out. So with Grim here, especially around the hood area where you get that rim light from the stained glass, I wanted to make sure that I didn't use a solid black line there. So some areas I've gotten rid of the line, and other areas I chose to keep the line. And I think it ultimately was pretty successful in this piece. So yeah, now you're starting to see that I'm fighting with the stained glass that's down below, trying to figure out what the best solution is. And eventually I just blacked it out and went, oh, that's probably the right answer. Okay, so now we've jumped forward a bit. This is after I've brought the gargoyle heads in. And I drew these on a separate piece of paper and then took a photo of them and brought them in through Photoshop and merged everything together in the final image. So the finished drawing doesn't actually have the gargoyle heads, it has the original stained glass. Also changed the clouds a bit. The spirits that were in the clouds before have now gone away, and I went with more of like a angelic, sort of celestial top half to the image and more of a kind of a purgatory demonic half for the bottom. I think it really sort of showcases the fact that this, Grimm travels in between the two worlds, sort of ferrying souls to where they are headed. I actually paint the clouds a couple times as well. The first time I do the clouds, I come up with this kind of stylized cloud that I actually like quite a bit, but decided it didn't fit the realism of the rest of the image. I don't use partly when I'm making the clouds. There's kind of a stylized white line that I use, which is a little akin to Disney or Ivan Earl, who worked on Sleeping Beauty. He's one of my favorite artists, so yeah, you'll see it kind of come in here with this white line to sort of highlight the clouds, but I don't do that anywhere else in the image. So if I was going to keep those clouds, I would have added that sort of white highlighted line throughout more of the piece. And now we're back to looking at maybe a monochrome color palette for the window. I chose the blue because it was complementary to the orange of the light in the clouds. And now we're adding some little ghost characters to the lantern that he's carrying. I wanted to use that opportunity to kind of bring in some more whimsy into the piece. I felt that it was lacking a little bit in my usual kind of wink and nod style that I use. Like my work is often, borderline scary, but usually you can find a little wink. So now we've jumped forward a bit more. I worked on this off the recording for a while, and I brought in these birds because I was really looking for a transition between the light and the dark halves of the piece, and I think the birds captured that perfectly. Also, ravens being a creature that sort of can travel in between worlds, similar to Grimm. So yeah, that's the finished piece. I really hope you like it. And thank you so much for all your support, patrons. I would not be able to do this without you. So yeah, see you in the next one.